Welcome to our deep dive into the world of, well, car materials. We've got some really cool articles about how car makers are like reinventing steel, using science to make cars safer and, way more fuel efficient.
It really is amazing how much innovation is happening with something as like basic as steel. We all think we know steel, but the science behind it is anything but basic.
So true. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. We're going to be looking at how new steel alloys and the manufacturing processes, even computer modeling, are changing car design. It's going to be pretty mind-blowing.
For sure. And to really appreciate how far we've come, we need to go back in time a bit. Remember those old heavy gas guzzlers? They weren't exactly known for their sleek designs or fuel efficiency.
Yeah, not so much.
Those clunky cars were a big reason why people started demanding, lighter and safer vehicles. Two major events really pushed this shift. Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, back in 1965, exposed a lot of safety issues in car design. And then the oil crisis of the 70s really highlighted the need for fuel efficiency.
Right? Those events were like huge wake-up calls for the auto industry. They had to rethink how they designed cars.
Exactly. And now with electric cars becoming more popular, this whole weight issue is even more important.
Oh, definitely. Why is that?
Well, take the Volvo XC40 Recharge. It's a full third heavier than its gas-powered version, and that extra weight really impacts the car's range and performance.
Huh. I didn't realize it was that much heavier.
Yeah, it's a big difference. So even with electric vehicles, we still need lighter materials.
So how do you make a car lighter without making it less safe? That's where the new steel comes in, right?
Exactly, but we're not talking about your grandfather's steel.
What do you mean?
Steel is so much more than just iron. It's all about the other elements you add, even in tiny amounts. And the processes used to make it, it's like, you know how chefs use a sous vide machine? Precise control over time and temperature creates totally different dishes.
I see. So you're saying it's the same with steel.
Exactly. The precise recipe and process can result in steel with a huge range of properties.
So steel making is like high-tech cooking. Okay, I get it. But how does that translate into stronger and lighter cars?
Well, it all comes down to the microstructure of the steel. You know how the different phases are arranged at a microscopic level?
Microstructure.
Yeah, think of it like looking at steel under a super powerful microscope. You'd see these distinct regions called phases. Some are harder and some are more flexible.
Okay, so you have these different phases within the steel.
Right, and by controlling those phases, you can create steel that's both strong and can bend without breaking. That's where the magic happens.
Okay, so there's this whole microscopic world inside the steel. How do they control those phases to get the exact properties they need for a car?
They use a bunch of innovative processes, but it all boils down to how the steel is heated and cooled. One technique is called quenching, where they rapidly cool the steel. It's kind of like taking hot cookies off a baking sheet and putting them on a cold surface to keep them from spreading.
So quenching is like flash freezing the steel structure.
Yeah, you could say that. And then there's another process called transformation-induced plasticity. This uses specific heating and cooling cycles to create an even more complex mix of phases.
And this results in
Steel that's incredibly strong and can absorb a lot of energy. Like in a car crash, this type of steel can help protect the passengers by absorbing the impact.
So they're basically choreographing a dance of atoms inside the steel. Wild. Okay, but how has steel making changed over time? I mean, it's been around forever.
There have been some really big advancements. We're talking 3 generations of what we call advanced high-strength steel. The first generation came out in the 90s. It was a big step forward. But then the second generation was even more sophisticated, using special alloys for even greater flexibility.
But those alloys probably came with a pretty hefty price tag, right?
You got it. They were expensive and difficult to work with, which limited their use. But then came the third generation of advanced high-strength steel. And this is where things get really exciting.
How so?
Well, this new generation is not only stronger and more flexible than the first, but it's also cheaper to produce than the second generation.
Wait, so it's stronger and cheaper?
Exactly. And we're talking steel almost 10 times stronger than the common steels used in the past. It's a total game changer.
Wow, that's a huge difference. So we might start seeing more affordable, safer cars sooner than we think?
That's the hope. These advancements could make a real difference in car safety and fuel efficiency for everyone.
It's just incredible. I'm really starting to see why there's so much hype around this new steel. How do they make it so strong? What's the secret?
It all comes down to manipulating those heating and cooling processes. Remember I mentioned quenching and transformation-induced plasticity? Well, for crucial parts of a car, like the side panels and pillars, they use very specific techniques.
Like what?
Imagine superheating steel with boron and manganese to over 850 degrees Celsius. Then within just 10 seconds, they transfer it to a die where it's shaped and then rapidly cooled. It's a pretty high-stakes process.
Yeah, I bet it sounds like these techniques are what create those ultra-strong parts that help keep us safe in a crash.
Exactly. And it brings us to another interesting aspect, the role of alloys.
Alloys.
Yeah, alloying steel isn't a new thing, though. Henry Ford was using vanadium steel alloys over a century ago in his Model Ts.
So even back then, they were experimenting with different ingredients to enhance steel.
Exactly. And just like recipes evolve, so do steel alloys. Modern steelmaking uses alloys like niobium, which has a significant impact on steel strength.
Niobium? How so?
Well, John Spear, a renowned steel processing expert, called niobium one of the most important physical metallurgy developments of the 20th century.
Wow, that's high praise. So niobium is a rock star in the world of steel. Okay, but with all this talk about heating, cooling, and alloys, how do scientists keep track of all these complex processes? It seems like a lot to manage.
Well, that's where computers come in. They're revolutionizing material design. They allow scientists to test new ideas at the atomic level without doing physical experiments.
So it's like a virtual laboratory for steelmaking.
Exactly. Think of it like how video games use physics engines to mimic real-world behavior. Scientists can play around with different variables and predict outcomes without all the time and expense of physical testing.
That's pretty amazing. It's like having a crystal ball for steelmaking. Okay, but is steel the only player in the game when it comes to making lighter cars? What about other materials?
You're right. It's not just about steel. Plastics and composites are also evolving, becoming stronger, lighter, and more environmentally friendly.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading that in 2017, the average car used almost 350 pounds of plastic. That's a lot of plastic.
It is. And while plastics have some advantages like being lightweight and versatile, there's also the question of what happens to all that plastic when the car is no longer usable. It's definitely something to think about.
It is. We're all becoming more aware of plastic waste and the need for sustainable solutions.
Definitely.
But it sounds like the future of car materials is going to be a really fascinating mix of innovation and responsibility.
I think so. With the need for safety, fuel efficiency, and sustainability driving innovation, we can be optimistic about the future of car materials. We're seeing breakthroughs that could really change the game.
So before the break, we were talking about how steel has practically become a superhero with scientists creating these amazing alloys and using special techniques to make it even stronger. But I'm still kind of fuzzy on how these different phases in the steel actually work together, to make it stronger and more shapeable at the same time.
It's really all about the interplay between hard and soft phases at the microscopic level. Think of a piece of steel made up mostly of a softer phase. It's called ferrite. Now sprinkle in some harder phases like martensite, and you basically create this tiny microscopic composite material. The harder phases act like tiny reinforcing pillars within that softer structure, so it's harder to deform.
So it's like adding rebar to concrete to make it stronger.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Okay, but how do they actually control the distribution of those phases to get the exact properties they need for different parts of the car?
That's where those precise heating and cooling processes we talked about come into play. Remember quenching, where they rapidly cool the steel. That locks in the desired arrangement of those phases. And then there's transformation-induced plasticity, which creates a more complex mix of phases. So you get steel that's both strong and flexible.
Right. It's like they're creating a custom blend for each specific part of the car.
Exactly.
But if you're making the steel stronger, doesn't that make it harder to shape into all the complex curves we see in cars today?
That's a really good question. You see, strength and what we call formability are often kind of at odds. The stronger the material is, the harder it is to bend and shape it without breaking it.
I can see that. It's like trying to fold a thick piece of cardboard. It just wants to crease or tear if you're not super careful.
Exactly. But here's what's amazing about these new generations of steel. They figured out how to increase both strength and formability at the same time.
Wait, so they can make it stronger without sacrificing the ability to shape it?
Exactly. They've broken the mold, so to speak, and created steel that's both super strong and super shapeable.
That's incredible. How do they do that?
They've come up with some pretty ingenious techniques. One of them is called hot stamping. It involves heating the steel to a very high temperature, which makes it more valuable. Then they rapidly shape it in a die before quenching it to lock in that shape.
So it's like working with molten glass, shaping it while it's hot, and then letting it cool and harden.
That's a great way to think about it. This technique allows them to create parts with really complex shapes like those curves and folds you see in modern cars.
It sounds like they're really pushing the boundaries of what's possible with steel.
They definitely are.
But with all this advanced technology, doesn't that make it super expensive?
You might think so, but one of the really great things about this third generation of advanced high-strength steel is that it's actually cheaper to produce than the second generation.
Hold on. So it's better and cheaper. How is that possible?
Remember those exotic alloys we talked about earlier? Well, this new generation achieves similar levels of strength and formability without needing those pricey ingredients.
So it's a win-win for car manufacturers and consumers.
You got it. It's like streamlining a recipe using more common ingredients without compromising on quality.
So this means we could see these advanced steels in a wider range of cars, not just luxury models.
Exactly. This affordability makes it much more accessible for widespread use. We're talking about making cars safer and more fuel efficient for everyone.
That's really great to hear. But what about the environmental impact of all this? I mean, steelmaking uses a lot of energy, right?
It's true that traditional steelmaking does have a significant carbon footprint, but there's a growing movement toward more sustainable methods, like using recycled steel and finding cleaner energy sources.
So it's not just about making better steel, but also about making it in a way that's better for the planet.
Exactly. There are some really promising developments in this area. Some companies are already experimenting with hydrogen as a fuel source for steelmaking, which could dramatically reduce emissions.
That's great to hear. It sounds like the steel industry is taking this seriously.
They are.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about steel, but what about those other materials we touched on earlier, like plastics and composites? What's happening in that space?
There's a ton of exciting innovation happening there, too. For instance, there's been a huge surge in the development of bio-based plastics. These are made from renewable resources like plants.
So instead of relying on fossil fuels, they're using nature's own building blocks.
Exactly. And these bio-based plastics are getting more and more sophisticated. They offer really similar performance to traditional plastics in terms of strength, durability, and versatility.
So we're not just talking about those flimsy, biodegradable bags you see at the grocery store?
No, not at all. These are high-performance materials that can hold up to the demands of car manufacturing.
That's impressive. And are they just being used for like interior parts, or are they making their way into more structural components?
They're starting to be used for load-bearing parts, too, based to advances in composite materials.
Corposites. Remind me what those are again?
Think of composites as a team of materials working together to achieve something that none of them could do alone, like combining the strength of steel with the lightness of plastic. It's like creating a hybrid material that excels in both areas.
So you're taking the best of both worlds. That's pretty cool.
It is. And these composites are being used in everything from body panels to structural components, which helps reduce the weight of the vehicle without compromising safety or performance.
It sounds like the future of car materials is going to be a really fascinating blend of these cutting-edge metals, bio-based plastics, and high-performance composites.
I think so. And who knows what other groundbreaking materials we'll discover in the years to come. It's a really exciting time to be following the evolution of the automotive industry.
It really is. It's amazing to think that the next car someone buys could be lighter, safer, more fuel efficient, and more environmentally friendly, all thanks to the incredible work being done in materials science.
We've just scratched the surface here. There's still so much more to explore.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into these amazing car materials. We've come a long way from those old clicky steel cars to the super high-tech, lightweight vehicles we see today. It's really clear that science is like totally transforming how we make cars.
Yeah, it's incredible. We've talked about how metallurgists are like modern-day alchemists, right? Creating these amazing steel alloys and manipulating them at the microscopic level. I mean, who would have thought there were so many different kinds of steel, each with its own unique properties?
It's mind-blowing, for sure. But like with any technology, there are always challenges and, new frontiers to explore. So what are some of the hurdles we face as we try to create the ultimate car material?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is balancing cost and performance. We've seen huge breakthroughs with materials like carbon fiber composites. They're incredibly strong and lightweight, but the cost is still pretty high, which limits their use.
Right, so it's like you get what you pay for. These top-of-the-line materials are usually only found in those high-end luxury vehicles.
Exactly, and that's why research into advanced steel alloys and manufacturing processes is so important. If we can make those high-strength, lightweight steels more affordable, it'll make safer and more fuel-efficient cars accessible to everyone.
It's like finding that perfect balance between performance and affordability.
Exactly.
But cost isn't the only thing, right? We've got to think about the environmental impact of all these new materials, too.
Absolutely. As we shift towards lighter materials, we need to think about the environmental impact of producing them and what happens to them when the car's life is over. Remember that mountain of plastic waste we talked about? We don't want to create new environmental problems while we're trying to solve others.
Right? We need to keep the bigger picture in mind. So what are some of the solutions being explored to make these materials more sustainable?
One really exciting area is the development of closed-loop recycling systems. It basically involves recovering materials from old cars and then reusing them to make new ones.
So it's like giving those materials a second life.
Yeah, exactly. It reduces waste and the need to extract new resources.
That's fantastic. And are there ways to make the recycling process itself more efficient?
Oh yeah, definitely. There are a lot of people working on that.
It's like closing the loop on the whole life cycle of these materials. That's awesome. But looking even further into the future, what other materials are out there? What's next in this whole material science revolution?
Well, one area with huge potential is nanotechnology. Imagine being able to manipulate materials at the atomic level, creating structures with properties we've never even seen before,
We're talking stronger than steel, lighter than a feather.
and even materials that can heal themselves.
Self-healing cars. That sounds like science fiction.
I know, right? But it's closer than you think. Nanotechnology could totally change how we design and interact with our vehicles. Imagine car bodies that can fix minor dents and scratches on their own, or batteries that charge super fast.
Wow, so nanotechnology could change everything from the car's structure to its performance.
And even the paint job, nanotechnology could lead to paint and coatings that are more durable, scratch-resistant, and even self-cleaning.
And that's what I call innovation. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of car materials, what are some of the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Well, I hope they come away with a better understanding of just how much science and innovation goes into making the cars we drive. It's not just about putting parts together. It's about pushing the limits of what's possible with these materials. And as we move forward, we need to keep the environment in mind and work towards a future where sustainability is a core part of that innovation,
I agree. It's really incredible to think about all the work that goes into something we might take for granted every day.
right?
So the next time you get into a car, take a second to think about all that incredible materials science that helped make your ride safer, more fuel efficient, and hopefully a little greener.
And remember, the search for that perfect car material is still going on. It's an exciting journey, and we're all a part of it. So stay curious and keep your eyes open to the amazing possibilities of science.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into car materials. Until next time, keep those wheels turning.